Hi, thanks for joining today. We're going to talk about pathfinding and what that looks like if you are going down a road that you have never been on. This is especially important for us creatives and entrepreneurs because, well, hey, when we have unique ideas, there really isn't a roadmap, right? That's why they're unique. But first, I want to introduce who I am. I am Genevieve, and I am a writer and creative and entrepreneur. And this channel is all about how to start getting things going because that is oftentimes the biggest hurdle. Can't tell you how many times I went through that. So let's get into today's discussion. This is actually inspired because I was listening to Seth Godin's podcast yesterday. It was an episode called Pathfinding and Failure. Yeah, those two words, right? The failure part is something that we oftentimes worry about when we don't know where we're going. So, for example, when I first started writing my book, I had no idea like what I was going to say, what I was going to write. I also was worried about, I didn't know if people were going to like it, if it was going to be worth the time. I didn't know how people would react. I mean, there are just so many unknowns. And what really struck me about this episode is the reminder that, it's not about whether or not we know how to get there. It's actually the journey of figuring it out. So I'm going to read this quote that Seth Godin said in the podcast, which I thought maybe would be inspiring for you. So he says, "The hardest part is to pick yourself. It's to say, I don't know exactly where we are going. I don't know how to get there, but the journey is both important and non-fatal. What we need are people to figure out how to be wrong on the way to being right." And just to provide you a little bit of context, he was giving value to those who don't necessarily have an instruction manual. Like, he equates that to basically people who are like bots, right? Who are in the system, which is very much the way our education system is set up in the US, right? We have standardized tests, which basically tell you, okay, we have multiple choice answers, which is A, B, C, D, and E, all the above, right? It's just so super cut and clear. Same thing when we go into whether it's some sort of corporate job, or it doesn't even necessarily have to be corporate, but there are just certain standards of the way we're supposed to interact with people, the way we're supposed to behave, the way that we're supposed to rise and go through climb the ladder. Our society doesn't necessarily value this straying, right? And finding new paths, which is why we have folks like Steve Jobs who are fired from their own company. But we all know that Steve Jobs, well, he's the reason why I'm recording on this iPhone, and so many of you guys are probably watching this video on an iPhone, right? It's because it's the pathfinders, right, who are willing to take the risks and make those mistakes and figure out what works and doesn't work, that we find these new innovative tools and ways of thinking and being and doing. I mean, heck, I was pretty resistant to having an iPhone because I was, when it first came out, just thinking like, well, why do I need all these things? I mean, just this cluttering up and all these things. But finally, I wasn't a late adopter, but it took me a few months before I was like, no, this is actually pretty cool. This is awesome. So what I want to break down is Seth Godin's quote. And the first thing he says is pick yourself. Now, this is probably one of the most difficult things to do because, as I mentioned before, our system is not set up that way, right? We are taught to conform. And it's one of those things where, a lot of times when we're growing up as children, we don't want to be different, right? Different means you get bullied. Different means, you're the outsider and then you don't belong and you get this feelings of rejection. It's natural to want to conform, but that conformity is not what creates unique ideas. So, for example, if you want to be writing a book, you don't want to just write the same thing that the next author did because, well, one, that's plagiarizing, and two, you have unique ideas, you have a different perspective. But that's the hard part for us, which is saying, hey, Like, I'm going to pick me. I'm going to pick the way I think, the way I do something, or I'm going to pick me instead, my happiness, instead of staying in a 9 to 5 that I really hate. And that takes a lot of courage, right? That's the part about being a pathfinder. The next thing that he mentions is that it's tough not having all of the answers. And it's kind of like one of the reasons probably why, I know for me, I have a little bit of a commitment phobia, right? Because I'm afraid. I was married and divorced, and for me, when I got divorced, I had a really difficult time thinking, well, do I want to be in a committed relationship again? Because I don't know what's going to happen. But at the same time, just because I don't know what's going to happen, it's also, I've been exploring in the last few months and actually last few years, discovering that fear is what's holding me back from having really deep connections with a potential life partner. So it's like these fears that we have, they aren't just in our work, but it's in everything that we approach into our life. And it's really hard not having those answers, right? And it might be not just in a relationship, but it might be towards the way you think about your book. Maybe you've never written a book before. I never wrote a book before, and I have mentioned this before, but I thought it was a terrible writer. My lit professor gave me a C for my senior thesis, and I was just like, okay, I mean, what business do I have in writing a book? But I did pick myself because I knew that I had stories that I wanted to share with people, that I had a certain journey that I hoped would help others feel like they could do it too, especially when it came to struggling with suicidal depression and then quitting my 9 to 5 job and exploring my voice as an artist. So the thing is, when we pick ourselves and then we say, we're willing to admit that we don't know where we're going, but it's going to be okay, that we'll figure it along the way, then it creates this opportunity for us to realize, as in Seth's point, it's not about figuring out, and making sure that we do it perfect. It's the journey of being the brave one to figure out what didn't work, what may have gone wrong, so that we can course correct and get to that place where we're like, yes, saying yes, and that we are finding what's right in our lives. So I hope that this gives you a little bit of inspiration to just start, even if you don't know where you're going. I have decided that for the next 100 days, because there are about 100 days left in the year, that I would do a video a day. And my goal is to do 100 shitty short videos, because I'm on the path to, one is for me, I want to learn what it is to produce consistently, show up consistently, and sort of just get rid of the perfection, this fear of perfection that I have. So I hope you'll stick around with me, and over the next 100 days, my goal, or I should say, because I don't really know where I'm going, but my hope is to focus on this idea around starting, because that is probably one of the scariest parts about any of our new projects. So if you liked this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Yes, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Peace.